as I was introduced, my name's James Kelly. I have a technical background more on the networking and security side before joining the OCP Foundation last year, and one of the few people with an IT technical background on the small staff of the OCP Foundation. There's just 20 people supporting a very large community of thousands of engineers and many more participants beyond our membership as well. For the agenda today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about OCP, just to make sure we're all on the same page about what OCP is. We'll talk about some points of intersection and alignment between SNIA and the OCP community, some of the contributions that the storage project has driven, for example, within the OCP community, and some of the things that we could potentially do together related to the storage.ai project that's coming up within SNIA and the Open Systems for AI strategic initiative within OCP. And that's that. I'll wrap up with some questions if we have time. So in introducing the OCP, really the OCP is about meeting the market and shaping the future, as it says. It's a community that's really hyperscale centric. And what we mean by that is it's really about trying to solve some of the hardest at-scale problems, technically, when it comes to data center technologies. Adhering to these 5 tenets that sort of fly through the middle here: openness, sustainability, impact, scale, and efficiency, to sort of upstream create technology contributions like open specifications, open reference architectures, best practice documents, configuration guides, and some open source code, although the community is mostly hardware oriented when it comes to all things data center, and publish those in a way that creates a more multi-vendor supply chain within the ecosystem. That obviously initially served hyperscalers and was one of the motivations. I won't go through the whole founding story of OCP, but it was started by Facebook, Intel, Rackspace, basically back in 2011. We're nearly 15 years old now. And of course, the hyperscalers had the interest to start this because that multi-vendor supply chain, which was at that time more heavily based on the ODMs, served them with custom solutions, specifically sort of servers, and then we became known for the racks. And today we're really known for much more than that, in fact. The scope of the community has broadened out from those early days to now 15 years later, really covering everything that covers large-scale data centers down to edge-sized data center technologies, and the range of the technology stack from silicon to systems to physical facilities. Somebody on the panel last week at the AI Infra Summit said from dirt to chip, literally from building data centers to the low-embodied carbon concrete slab that people are now having to align to if you want to build AI and hyperscale-ready data centers. Those standards and those specifications are being formed within our community. And then, on the flip end of things, there's people that are working on like die-to-die interfaces for chiplet technologies. So it really covers a vast spectrum of things, from cooling to power to mechanical to everything inside of the IT rack. A little bit about the history. Without going through all of this, I just wanted to flash this up and say the magnitude of where OCP is today in 2025. As I said, we've got thousands and thousands of engineers that are actively participating in our mailing lists and our calls. It's completely open to the public. You don't have to be a member. One of the misconceptions that's somewhat common when people start to get involved with the OCP community is that they feel like they have to sign up for membership, which is how the foundation supports itself financially. But that's actually not true. Everything that we do within the OCP community is public. You can just find one of the projects that's of interest to you, for example, the storage project, and you'll go and be able to join the mailing list, and you'll be able to see the calendar of all the calls for the main top-level projects, the work streams, and add those calls to your own calendar and join the Zoom meetings and participate there. And if you're not part of the OCP and you want maybe a warm introduction, then you can come and see me afterwards, and I'll be happy to introduce you to them. But I'm pretty sure that the project leads are actually in this room, and there's probably many of the participants within the OCP in this room. So Most of the work happens in that virtual sense of the community, building towards open specifications, like some of the things I'll talk to in a minute. But we do come together face-to-face in person as well at these things called OCP summits. As it says there on the far side, if you take together the sum total of all of the live events that OCP hosted this year, it will exceed 18,000 people. We're expecting over 10,000, maybe much more than that, in fact, next month, October 13th to 16th in San Jose at the convention center there. And the summit's just grown and grown and grown. And it's a great place for engineers to come together, and I've learned a lot. Another statistic I'll get to in just a second there as well. I wanted to quickly, again, flash up a sample of the diverse membership. More and more, as I said, there has been this blossoming of vendors that were really inside of the server space, to the rack space, to the facility space, like cooling and power now. And then, of course, from the operator side, it's been an expansion to the global set of hyperscalers and other large data center operators and colos. Now, of course, all of the neo clouds as well are engaged in OCP. Some of them are members, some of them are not, so we don't have necessarily all their logos up here, like the big ones, but they are actually involved, and you'll see them at Summit. So I mentioned the Global Summit. That's the largest OCP event that happens in San Jose, and that's the one that's actually nearest to us right now because it's coming up next month in just a few weeks. We do summits and we do tech days. The other large summit that happens in EMEA rotates in terms of different cities. It's coming up next spring in Barcelona, April 29th and 30th, as it says there. And then we actually kicked off an inaugural APAC summit in Taipei and completely sold out with 1,500 people. We couldn't take more than that because we only planned for around 1,000. And so we're going to expand that more than double perhaps next year. And then we also do these smaller one-day events. Sometimes they're even in the local language in the case of the China Tech Day and the Korea Tech Day. And we usually get hundreds of people at those events. In terms of what the OCP has driven, I think that everybody here understands the value of open source and open specifications and open standards being at a conference that's run by SNIA. And much of the same impact is true when it comes to how the community makes an impact on the world with respect to OCP. We do commission IDC every year to refresh a study of the impact of all of the open specifications that are getting implemented inside of data center equipment. How much does that actually, of the TAM, of all the purchased equipment from a data center perspective, is effectively OCP inspired or OCP accepted? Some of you members may know that if you have a product that's based on a spec, for example, you can have it listed on the OCP marketplace. But those are basically the qualification marks, OCP accepted or OCP inspired. So they go and they talk to a lot of operators and vendors and whatnot. And 2025 is the year where we'll basically surpass over $100 billion in sales of OCP recognized equipment, which is pretty great. And then finally, on my OCP overview section, the OCP works with organizations like SNIA here and many other more traditional standards bodies and other research and education organizations, other professional associations, and some that are more complementary to us, for example, on the software management side, like DMTF, for example. Everybody here knows, for example, probably the Swordfish project and how a lot of the folks around the hardware management project at OCP align behind Redfish as well. So yeah, we're very happy to have inked an alliance partnership with SNIA this year, as well as several others like UA Link and UEC, but specifically to continue to work together more closely. And one of the ways that the relationship often works between OCP and other standards bodies is that the OCP is not a standards body. We don't do standards, but we do open specifications. Because of that, and because of the hyperscalers often getting involved in those specifications, they tend to push those contributions out faster than you would coalesce around a standard. So when the specifications get good traction, then they often get adopted by another organization that's a traditional standards body and sort of hardened and mature in that sense. That could be one of the working relationships between OCP and SNIA. So let's turn to talk about the relationship between the two communities now. In overview, I wanted to quickly cover some of the OCP touch points. So we have the OCP storage top-level project. There are, in fact, 12 top-level projects at the Open Compute project, and there's many sub-projects and many work streams of those projects. And then that's basically where the work actually happens, as I mentioned. There's 3 different work streams specific to the storage project, and I think Lee and Ross and Mike, the steering committee member, are in the room here. So again, if you aren't involved in the storage project, I assume that that's right up your alley being at this event, so I'd encourage you to maybe just peruse the calls, put them into your calendar and see what's going on in the community there. But if you wanted to dive into specific areas where work might happen towards a more specific narrow goal, that's usually when work streams are set up. And as you can probably tell, there's these 3 on thermal sim methodology, NVMe, HDD, and HDD dynamics here under storage. The security top-level project is also another area of alignment, and specifically I'll talk a little bit about OCP lock, which is a security key management technology specific to storage devices in a moment, that's come together and actually about to go to version 1.0 soon. We also have sort of what you call probably a memory fabrics type of project. This is a sub-project under our server top-level project called the Composable Memory Systems. So if you're more into, say, like the CXL type of world, there's plenty going on there as well. When it comes to data movement over the network, there's the networking top-level project and many sub-projects within that. We've got an area of the OCP called FTI, which stands for Future Technologies Initiative. And the FTI work streams are effectively sort of like an incubation ground. Sometimes a community of interest comes together within the OCP, and it doesn't necessarily know that it wants to drive towards a very specific specification, but they may work on best practices, reference architectures, white papers, and whatnot. So we do have some areas in the OCP, such as this one that's listed here, the data-centric computing FTI workstream, which focuses on computational storage, processing of memory, DPUs, and more. And actually, this workstream also is submitted their white paper to be a contribution, which has, I think, been all approved now, so it should be public in the coming days, so that may be of interest to some of you to check out, please. And then I already mentioned, for example, Redfish and how there's points of alignment there. I know that we've had plenty of people talk about cooling innovations specific to drives and how that can potentially align with SNIA's green storage, TWG. And then obviously we have this Open Systems for AI strategic initiative that I said I'd mention and talk about more in a moment that I think could align to SNIA's storage.ai project. So those are the places where you could potentially engage. I wanted to highlight, borrowing from the storage workshop, a slide of theirs that shows an overview of recent contributions from the storage project, since that's probably the biggest point of intersection with this audience here. And not necessarily go through these line by line, but you can see, for example, the list of the contribution titles and some of the major contributors in that area, right? So I think, for example, Mohammed mentioned, and I know he talked about this at the APAC summit, some ways that the community can potentially come together and unify interfaces. And they've been, together with Microsoft and WD, Mohammed from Seagate, working towards that specification of NVMe for HDD drives for some time, and working towards, I think at Seagate and probably other companies too, getting that into production now as well. I know that he said that there's actually more than 100 companies involved in that original specification at the APAC summit, but these are the 3 main stakeholders there. And then you'll see some others, and you'll see some, for example, the data center NVMe SSD spec for that. Go through several iterations, such as the 2.5, 2.6, and then 2.7 recently, as you kind of go down towards 2025. And one of the contributions, the last line here, lock, is something that I wanted to touch on as well. The OCP lock and OCP safe framework are two things that storage vendors, storage developers such as this audience should probably be aware of and hopefully involved in or adopting. So lock is short for layered open source cryptographic key management. This allows the drive to use probably your existing crypto AES engine and something like a trusted hardware root of trust. Project Calyptra actually is what implements this and allows a higher quality, effective key management solution for drives to tackle problems like erasure and other ways that will allow drives to be reused. Obviously, hyperscalers have these issues at heart because they can't have their users' data leaving or unsafe when a drive gets retired, for example. And then the SAFE program stands for Security Appraisal Framework and Enablement. One of the challenges the data center operators have is getting an audit done of various products. Oftentimes, hardware would get audited many times by different auditors, for example, and for the sake of different hyperscalers. The OCP SAFE program effectively acts as a single point that hyperscalers can sort of come together on and agree on a set of audit principles that are then implemented by a vetted set of security review providers. We call them SRPs. And those SRPs can have a vendor come to them and say, I would like my product, for example, my drive, or I think there's a picture of a flash drive here as well that's in the OCP marketplace because they can be listed there once they pass the SAFE framework. The SRPs can effectively certify a vendor's gone through and passed the OCP SAFE tests. So once that happens, of course, that acts as a single point that all of the hyperscalers have a point of assurance, effectively, and conformance when it has the OCP SAFE badge. And the products, as I say, can get listed on the marketplace. So I think this is an interesting point of collaboration, as I put at the bottom of the slide, for the security technical working group here. When it comes to storage.ai, which I think Jay's talking about next, and the OCP, sort of equivalent, you might say, is the Open Systems for AI strategic initiative. The initiative is really an umbrella initiative at OCP because, as I said, the work typically happens somewhat siloed inside of the projects. But as more co-design and development happens between the pieces of hardware and, for that matter, software when it comes to AI, these projects need to come together. And we realize that, and that's sort of the foundation of forming the Open Systems for AI initiative at OCP. I'll talk just more about that in a second, but I wanted to talk about how our two communities can work together. Obviously, we can sort of come together as two communities at events by way of mailing lists and other calls. We do have organizations that don't necessarily do everything in the public like OCP does, and we do have a way that we can sort of create a closed collaboration group now between SNIA and OCP for folks that might not be SNIA members, for example, that want to offer feedback on something that's going on there. So we can facilitate that now, especially that we've got the alliance in place. I already mentioned this, but it's fairly common that OCP open specifications or reference architectures sometimes go on to be matured and hardened at standards bodies. So I could certainly see that happening between the two organizations. And then obviously, the OCP products and component specs go through different levels of a hierarchy. Some specs are what we call base specs, or fairly abstract, so that vendors don't necessarily need to disclose a lot of their intellectual property. Those specifications can often incorporate SNIA standards, and as those things make their way, thank you, I see the 10 minutes, make their way onto the OCP marketplace, obviously the vendors can then say that these things adhere to such and such contribution at OCP and such standard at SNIA. And we're happy to list both of those things, for example, on our marketplace listings as well. So if you've got a product in this space, let us know. I'll just wrap up by touching a little bit more on AI, since it's a theme of all events nowadays. And I mentioned the Open Systems for AI is a new strategic initiative at OCP. We differentiate it by calling it a strategic initiative versus the projects. Again, the projects are led by volunteer leads, usually at least 2 different people. In the case of the projects, not necessarily the work streams, they're actually elected too by the community and for the community. The Open Systems for AI initiative started at the beginning of 2024 with an idea to create this umbrella for collaboration when it comes to AI across the technology areas. We see really 2 things happening. Obviously, you have conversations that are related by different technical sets of engineers, right? For example, like power and cooling coming together, because they're effectively, one side's generating a lot of thermals and the other side's trying to cool it. So there are different silos that sort of come together across the horizontal space within the OCP community. And then there's also other areas where we see almost like vertically, there's just a single thread, for example, of power delivery throughout many different areas of the community, ranging from like power delivery at the facilities level, talking about solid state transformers, to talking about power delivery within the rack, talking about stuff like battery backups and power shelves, to talking about power delivery at the die level and vertical power delivery, for example, at the semiconductor technology level. So trying to stitch these areas together is one of the things that this initiative was formed for. Now, we can't obviously join everybody and solve for all problems in one place. So we sort of divided it up into like work areas that you sort of see on the left here: systems management, IT infrastructure, and physical infrastructure. The work typically happens in terms of actual contributions inside of the projects. The one exception to that is a white paper that the community put out, and it's 100 pages long. It sort of covers the challenges and opportunities, the readily available solutions for AI clusters, as well as some of the gaps that the community needs to work on. And that's published on our contribution database. And we also have a new area of the OCP marketplace. So all of those products that I mentioned that adhere to OCP open specs that have to do with implementing an AI cluster, we've sort of listed them on an AI segment of the marketplace now. And I'll close by talking about some of the recent contributions when it comes to AI. These are just some highlights of many. As I mentioned, first of all, there's the Open Systems for AI Blueprint for Scalable Architecture for AI Clusters white paper. So please have at it and peruse that. It's 100 pages, as I mentioned, but you can often just like dive into a focus area of where your particular focus is. For the people in this area of storage, I would imagine that you probably want to go and read the section on the IT infrastructure. And we're happy to revise that and make edits of those things. They go through many versions, so anybody that wants to be a contributor to that in the future, please come and let us know. And join the mailing list and the calls for the Open Systems for AI group. I'm sure everybody knows the GB200 NVL72 rack by NVIDIA. They donated the specs and the CAD diagrams for this to OCP and all of the details of the MGX trays and the liquid cooling manifolds power that goes along with that. Meta has their own version of that they call Catalina. Those were announced last October. More recently, the high voltage DC needs within the data center are driving for intermediate solutions until we can get to plus minus 400 or 800 volts DC from the busway directly into a rack. How do you retrofit data centers today with high voltage DC into an IT rack? Well, one of the ideas that many of the hyperscalers kind of came together to build is Mount Diablo. This is specifically Meta, Microsoft, and Google. It's a power sidecar rack. So that specification is now in the OCP And then Google actually released their Project Deschutes CDU, the coolant distribution unit. That's gone through 5 iterations internally at Google, and now it's an open source specification. And then Broadcom has also talked about scale-up Ethernet as an alternative for scale-up networking, and that specification lives at the OCP too. All right, so I think I've covered a lot now in terms, I know that I've just got 5 minutes left. So with this sort of call to action slide, I will again repeat that you don't need to be a member organization to join the OCP community. I'd encourage you to take a look across the projects, those ones that are relevant to you, join those mailing lists, join those calls, or at least get them on your calendar so you can join them whenever you can. Obviously, I would encourage you to join the OCP summits. There's plenty of good content there, and the content is buy-in for the community. In other words, it's the community leaders that pick the content that go into the call for presentations, and that's coming up next month. Everything also gets recorded and posted online, so if you can't make it, don't feel like you're going to get left behind. You can check it out online too. And obviously, there's the potential for you to drive impact within shaping the market through open source at the OCP community beyond just, passively participating on the mailing list. You can actually be active on the calls, drive an agenda, share ideas, even to the point of even leading work streams for new contributions. So with that, again, I will thank everyone for your time and trust. And I really look forward to the SNIA and the OCP Alliance partnership. If we have time, we can take maybe a question or two if anybody's got one.
So I just wanted to put a plug again. So on the Thursday for the OCP Global Summit, we do have an all-day storage track. It goes from 8:30 to 4. So hope to see some of you folks there. Thanks.
Addison Snell, Intersect 360 Research, thank you very much for the presentation. At last year's OCP Global Summit, there was an excellent presentation by Geico talking about using OCP configurations from ODMs that usually supply hyperscale to repatriate and come back on premises for their full complement of HPC, AI, analytics, and general enterprise workloads using OCP configurations, but doing them on premises instead of hyperscale. Do you think that's part of a larger trend? Will we see more of that, or do you think that's kind of a one-off?
Yeah, great question. I certainly see that trend is happening within the neoclouds, which are not necessarily hyperscalers. Traditionally, the biggest adopters of OCP equipment are the hyperscalers, however. This is something that we kind of break out in the research that we do to try to better understand it. But as the folks at Geico said, it's, there are trade-offs with adopting this kind of gear. Right, the level of support you get from an ODM is not the level of support you get from an OEM provider. So there are those sorts of things to contend with, but then you know that you're getting at-scale designs that are probably future-ready, more evolvable, less forklifts, hopefully, along the way of going down the path of evolving your infrastructure. And we know infrastructure is changing faster than ever thanks to AI. So yes, we do see this trend continuing with large enterprises, but in the enterprise space, it is still slow. So I would say neoclouds are really sort of paving the way and the next big group of OCP adopters.
Thank you.
One more. Hi, Mike Lavelle, Abbott Laboratories. In the Korean and Chinese OCP presentations or gatherings, what were the two most followed tracks that there was interest?
That's probably a question for some of the organizers there, because I was actually only at one of those events. I was at the Korea Tech Day, and I did a 10-minute keynote, and I was the only English speaker there. Everything else was in Korean. I recognized a lot of things on the slides, but it was very hard for me to follow, so I didn't actually go to all of the breakouts. I listened through all of the keynotes. So I don't have an answer for you, but the content is online, so I'd encourage you to go to the past events page of the OCP website, and you can find that there. But what was the most popular, I don't know. You might be able to look at you could look at the views on the YouTube. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, James, for those open updates.